If you ever go to the US debt clock and you see a bunch of numbers that look big, scary, and overwhelming, you certainly probably had the thought that, oh my God, we're in a lot of trouble. There is no way that we could pay this. What are we going to pass off to our kids or grandkids? They're going to inherit all of this debt. So right now, the United States owes about $36.2 trillion. That's our debt obligation. Our GDP is right around 30 trillion, which means our debt to GDP, the ratio, is a little over 120%. Normally, I really do not like to use the analogy of personal finance to explain government debt, but I think it's useful here. In your personal finances, if you went and bought a home for $300,000, but only made $100,000 per year, would you look at that as a bad situation just based on those two numbers? Your debt to income ratio is 300%. It could be, but there's more information that you need to know, right? It's not just how much you owe, it's what does it cost to service that debt? What does it cost to make the payments on that debt? How much do you bring in? In the government, there is a similarity. Our GDP is the national income. That's what we're bringing in. That's at 30 trillion. What we owe is 36.2 trillion. Another thing to consider is that most of what we owe is owed to us. Roughly 75% or so is owed to Americans. So when we make our debt payment, we're actually paying ourselves back, and that becomes income for us. There's something very key to understand when you start thinking about how to address a high level of debt, and that's that every dollar spent in the economy is earned by somebody. In other words, if I go buy something from you and spend $100 on it, I spent $100 and you earned it. And you now have $100 extra to spend. And if you spend that $100, somebody else earned your spending. Extrapolate this through the whole economy, and you can see why our economy is driven so much by spending. If you reduce the spending of somebody, you're reducing the income of somebody else. And that means they have less money to spend, and this starts to contract an economy. And if that happens, then you're also reducing income taxes as well as sales taxes. So you start to reduce tax revenue when you start reducing spending. And that makes the debt to GDP ratio even higher. What really needs to happen to manage the economy effectively is to start realizing that not all spending is spending. Some of that spending is an investment. Some of it grows the GDP. And if it's growing the GDP, it's helping you service the debt. It's helping you pay the debt payment over time. That's akin to having a raise, getting a raise in income. And instead of making $100,000 a year, you're making $110,000 a year. You get that raise, you can make your payments easier. We need to drive up the GDP while controlling the spending and making sure the spending is productive and helps to grow the GDP. So what kind of spending does that? We have to acknowledge how expensive poverty is and wealth inequality. When people are poor and they go to a school that isn't graduating a lot of people and sending them off to colleges to become the engineers and doctors of tomorrow, or when people fall through the cracks and end up in the prison system, these aren't investments. These are things that are hurting our future GDP. There's still spending that is going to happen with that. We're going to perpetually throw money into underperforming schools and to a prison system, but we're not growing the economy. So when we start talking about spending, productive spending as an investment, you have to start talking about addressing poverty. And this means you fund things that will grow the economy. You fund schools, making sure that the schools that need the most money get it. As we have our system based on property taxes primarily, the schools that need the least money get the most. So you have kids in poor districts that get very little help. They have high student to teacher ratios when they need to have more to address the learning gaps that accompany growing up in poverty. Another spending investment would be childcare, free childcare. If we made it so you did not have to pay to have your kid put into a pre-K, the parent could go to work, and the children can bridge those learning gaps that accompany poverty. And now they start to become a more productive member of society, but also it reduces the strain on the education system later, so they end up costing less in the education system. The schools become better. If you think about somebody trying to go to school nowadays and trying to pick a career they want to pursue, what they're looking at is the time that their career will last, how much can they make, how much will they enjoy it, all of these things. This means it really pays us to invest in having good careers, lots of options to choose from. We want our teachers to be well paid and have good benefits. Our doctors, we want them to be well trained and have good benefits. We don't want to make these jobs miserable. This just leads to a lower GDP over time. It leads to people quitting after they've started things. Make things good. Make things, let unions actually fix these problems. Unions are great because they address the problems on the local level without having a government interfere. And the other thing would be healthcare, to make sure that no matter what happens to you, you can get treated for your problems. It's a lot harder to become a productive member of society if you're dealing with mental illness, and that mental illness just never gets treated. Another investment, instead of an expense, would be public education from pre-K all the way through college, including trade school. What you need is a system where you can go back to school if your job was disrupted or lost, and better yourself so you can emerge from that doing whatever you want to do. Recently, the credit rating for the entire country was downgraded by Moody's, which means our perfect credit rating that we had before was made a little worse. It means that people and countries are having less confidence that we can and will service the United States debt payments that we owe. This makes debt more expensive because it drives interest rates higher. It means that the payments that we have to make on our own debt increase, not only because the debt itself is increasing, but the interest rate went up on that debt. We're focusing on entirely the wrong things. Right now, the administration in office is focusing on the trade deficit. The trade deficit is a component of our GDP. Basically, if you add up consumer spending, government spending, business investment, and net exports, that is GDP. The trade deficit is the net exports part. It's a negative. That's why it's called a deficit. And it's roughly a little over $1 trillion in the negative. So it lowers our GDP. But it's dwarfed, absolutely dwarfed, by consumer spending and business investment and even government spending. All of these numbers, especially consumer spending, are much higher than that 1 trillion that we have as a trade deficit. If you think about it, what that really means, when we import something from another country, first of all, there are exports that are happening. We're exporting a lot, but we're importing more. But we are increasing the ability for us to spend in other ways because we have cheaper priced goods here. And that leads to businesses that open up. I bought a number of years ago, I bought an electric bike a number of years ago. It was manufactured in China, but all of the jobs that surrounded that were United States jobs. They hired multiple people here in the United States to handle the logistics of once they got here to get them shipped out. That's just one company. So yeah, it might have been manufactured there, but many jobs were created here to make that business happen. You should also know that when you're trying to bring manufacturing to a country, there's really only one reason that manufacturing is going to happen in a given country. And what it is they have some kind of a competitive advantage to do that. What is that competitive advantage on many products? They can build it cheaper and better than we can. We might be able to build a good product, but if we can't do it at a competitive rate, people aren't going to buy it here, and we're not going to export it elsewhere. It's a trade-off. A good economy recognizes that there are certain things that that country is good at, and certain things that it should not be attempting to do. There's a lot of things that we just will never manufacture here because we just can't do it affordably. Our GDP per capita is roughly 20 times higher than some of the countries that we import from. You're never going to sell products that we manufacture here to a country where they're only earning $3,000 or $4,000 per year. They're just not going to be able to afford the products no matter what you do. If we want a healthy economy, we have to keep spending. We have to control the spending so it's investment spending. We also have to make sure that things don't get overly priced here due to asset inflation, and this lends itself into tax policy. There's a bit more than 800 people in the country who are billionaires. Their average net worth is a little over $8 billion per person. Some of them are just barely billionaires, and some are dwarfed by the richest, the Elon Musk's, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett's, and Bill Gates. These are the extreme billionaires, but their average net worth of the billionaires is around $8 billion, and there's 800 plus of them. Additionally, of the people with a net worth between 100 million and a billion, the average net worth is about 550 million, and there are roughly 10,000 of those people. The combined net worth of all of these people with a net worth of over 100 million is about $12 trillion. Let's say we just hypothetically decided to take the entire $12 trillion from these roughly 11,000 people. Obviously, $12 trillion isn't going to pay a $36 trillion debt. It would knock off a third of it. But that's not the goal of a wealth tax or a very high income tax that could effectively control their wealth, or a high estate tax. The reason a high tax on the extremely wealthy people is so important is because it makes it easier for everybody else to have a good income to grow the economy. So I'm going to go back to the analogy of a monopoly game. It's the richest player that makes the other players poor. That happens in a real economy too. Rich people own things. The poorer people rent from them. I'm not against rich people. I'm all for people doing well, and I think there needs to be a system designed to lead to a lot of upward mobility. But it's gotten to a point where it's just extreme, and it's hurting us. When you have too much wealth tied up into too few people in society, those few wealthy people are hoarding assets that could be owned by many, many more people. The largest farm owner in the United States is Bill Gates. Very rich people are investing their money. They don't need extra money. When they get extra money, it's not disposable income. It's just money that gets used to invest in assets, and that drives up asset prices. If you drive up asset prices, you start to price other people out of the economy. And that's the problem. The other problem, of course, is that now, with the way our system is, you can actually buy politicians. Think about the way the Senate is structured. If you're a corporation that does not want a bill to pass, there's 100 senators, 2 per state. Doesn't matter how big the population of the state is, but there's 2 per state. But what this means is, especially since a senator stays in office for a minimum of 6 years, is if you can bribe a few on each side of the aisle, Democrat, Republican, and prevent them from passing something that will hurt your bottom line as a corporation, they're not going to pass it. It stands no chance. There's no way you can effectively fix that system the way our current Constitution is written, the way our political system and the policies and our system has evolved into today. This was exacerbated, of course, in 2010 when the Supreme Court ruled on the Citizens United Supreme Court case, which essentially allowed unlimited money to flow into politics. That's where you started to see super PACs and lobby money. It just shot through the roof. The biggest reason then to tax the rich isn't just to pay down the debt, it's to prevent the rich from bankrupting and exploiting and hurting everybody else. It's not a punishment against wealth. I think there needs to be upward mobility, but there needs to be a limit on how much wealth you can reasonably obtain. And that limit is going to be determined by wealth inequality. When you get to a point where there are no more players in that Monopoly game to pay the person with all the hotels and you land on Boardwalk, it's game over. That is the problem that we are running into right now. This is the problem of excessive capitalism. And again, if you think of capitalism, think of the Monopoly game. It drives money to one player. It creates one player as the wealthiest player, and that player uses that wealth to reduce the wealth of everybody else. Similarly, in a real economy, the wealthy are making it harder to live for everybody else. If they raise your rent, more money is flowing to that person and leaving less money to flow to other parts of the economy. If your rent goes up, you have less money to spend at a restaurant. If your rent goes up, you have less money to spend on a extracurricular activity for your kids' school. By putting more money into the bottom of the economy, into the lower part of the economy, what you're doing is you're increasing demand at the bottom. And that drives businesses all through the economy. And that's what services the debt, is that spending. That's productive spending. So I started this video off by talking about the difference between productive spending and being an investment. And that's kind of what I got into. Productive spending is spending that flows to the bottom of the economy. And again, in a Monopoly game, I'm going to go back to that example again. Imagine instead of $200 for pass and go, there was a program in the Monopoly game to give more than $200 for pass and go if you don't own any houses. And there was also a tax system in that Monopoly game to tax every time you pass go based on the number of houses that you have. Suddenly that game might go on forever. It might be an indefinite forever game. It wouldn't be a fun game, but it makes for a much better economy. And that's the situation I think people need to look at. They need to stop looking at it as this capitalism is good and socialism is bad, and rather look at it as capitalism is a component of an economy, but it shouldn't be the entire economy. It shouldn't be capitalism or socialism. It should be how we engineer the economy. Do we throw some socialism in there to drive the money right back to the bottom again so that the game can go on forever?